The Montana sun beat down on Robert Thornton's weathered face as he mended the fence line of his cattle ranch. At 68, his tall frame remained strong despite decades of hard labor, though gray now dominated his once dark beard. 5 years had passed since anyone in Clearwater County had heard Robert speak a word. 5 years of nods, gestures, and handwritten notes when absolutely necessary. The people in town called him the Silent Rancher, treating his muteness as fact rather than mystery. Most knew the reason: the devastating losses that had befallen him half a decade ago when cancer took his wife Margaret, followed 6 months later by a ranch accident that killed their only son, Michael. The day they buried Michael was the day Robert's words had dried up completely. Sheriff Dave Calloway's patrol car kicked up dust as it traveled a long drive to Robert's house. Dave had been making these visits every couple of weeks since the silence began. Sitting on the porch, talking about town news while Robert listened, occasionally nodding but never responding verbally. "Morning, Robert." Dave called, settling into the familiar wooden rocking chair. "Linda's planning the 4th of July picnic at the lake. Says to tell you you're welcome. Same as always." Robert nodded, his pale blue eyes acknowledging Dave's presence while revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Might do you good to get out," Dave continued. "Been 5 years now." Something tightened around Robert's eyes, and Dave quickly changed the subject. Later that evening, as twilight painted the valley in purple shadows, Robert sat on his porch with Buck, his aging border collie, at his feet. The silence that had become his refuge wrapped around him like a familiar blanket. Inside the house, everything remained exactly as Margaret had left it. Her blue willow china in the hutch, her quilts in the cedar chest, her gardening books on the bedside table. The locals said he was just waiting to die, on nights when sleep eluded him. Robert sometimes wondered if they weren't right. The sole banner appeared on the old Peterson place in early May, ending 2 years of vacancy since Jim Peterson had moved to assisted living in Missoula. Robert watched from the ridge above his eastern pasture as a moving truck, followed by a silver SUV, navigated the rutted driveway of the neighboring property. In town that week, Robert overheard Martha Jensen at the general store filling in Sheriff Dave's wife on the newcomers. "Sarah Collins," Martha was saying. "She's the new principal they hired for the elementary school, moving from Seattle with her daughter after divorce." Robert added extra fencing wire to his supply list, anticipating the need to reinforce the boundary line that had been neglected since Jim's departure. If the newcomers had a child, the river crossing would need proper marking. Sarah Collins had indeed purchased the Peterson property, knowing its rundown condition. After 15 years in Seattle's public school system, the prospect of wide open spaces and a small rural school appealed to her. The divorce from Mark had been finalized for over a year, but Seattle still held too many painful memories. Her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, had embraced country living with unexpected enthusiasm. Having grown up in a Seattle apartment, the freedom of 40 acres was intoxicating. Mom, come see," Emma called, racing into the kitchen. "There's a family of rabbits living under the old shed, and I found deer tracks by the river." Sarah smiled at her daughter's excitement, relieved to see the spark that had dimmed during the difficult months of the divorce beginning to return. "That's wonderful, honey, but remember our rule about the river." I know. Don't go near the water without you," Emma recited, her freckled nose wrinkling. "But, Mom, it's not deep where I was." "Rules are rules," Sarah said firmly. Emma's explorations grew more ambitious each day. She had discovered an old apple orchard, a dilapidated treehouse, and countless animal trails. She'd also spotted her mysterious neighbor, a tall figure working along fence lines, always accompanied by a black and white dog. That would be Robert Thornton, explained Diane Lewis, Emma's future third-grade teacher, during a welcome dinner. "He keeps to himself these days. He doesn't talk," put in Diane's teenage son, Kyle. "Like, at all. It's weird." "Kyle," Diane admonished, then turned to Sarah. Robert experienced some terrible losses a few years back. His wife died of cancer, and then their son was killed in a ranch accident just months later. Robert, well, he just stopped speaking after that. Hasn't said a word to anyone in about 5 years. 2 weeks after their arrival, On a warm June morning when Sarah was on a video call with her administrative team, Emma set off with her explorer's kit: a notebook, colored pencils, a magnifying glass, and a canteen of water. The morning passed pleasantly until Emma found herself drawn to the sound of running water, following the game trail toward the river boundary. From a large boulder near the bank, she could see across to the neighboring ranch, where the man and his dog were checking the fence line. "Hello over there," she called, waving enthusiastically. "I'm Emma. We're your new neighbors." Robert looked up, startled by the small voice piercing his silent routine. After a moment's hesitation, he raised his hand in what might have been a greeting before turning back to his work. "Your dog is really cool. What's his name?" Emma persisted. Robert glanced at her again, his expression unreadable beneath his worn cowboy hat, then returned to securing a loose wire without responding. It's polite to answer when someone asks you a question. Emma informed him matter-of-factly. "My mom says good manners are important everywhere, even in Montana." Something like amusement flickered across Robert's weathered features, but he made no attempt to respond. Instead, he whistled for his dog and moved farther down the fence line. "I'll come back tomorrow." Emma called after him, "And I'm going to keep talking until you talk back. That's a promise." That night, as Robert sat on his porch, Buck at his feet, he found his thoughts disturbed for the first time in years. The child's clear voice had been the first call to him directly in so long. She had addressed him as if expecting an answer, as if his voice was still a thing that existed in the world. "What's his name?" she had asked about Buck. Such a simple question. Once, he would have answered without thought. The words formed in his mind but died before reaching his lips, as they had for 5 long years. True to her word, Emma returned to the river the following afternoon. Robert, repairing an irrigation pump nearby, felt her arrival before he saw her, perched on the same rock, legs swinging, watching him with open curiosity. "Hi again, Mr. Thornton," she called. "My mom says that's your name. She says you've lived here forever and ever." Robert nodded once, acknowledging her greeting. Encouraged, Emma continued, "We moved here from Seattle. It rains a lot there, and there are really tall buildings. I like it better here. The air smells different, cleaner." Over the next 2 weeks, a peculiar routine established itself. Each afternoon, Emma would appear at the river crossing. Robert, who had once structured his days to minimize contact with others, now found himself scheduling tasks that would bring him within earshot during her visits. Emma would talk, sharing stories from her day, asking questions that hung unanswered in the air, occasionally reading aloud from whatever book she was enjoying. Robert would work nearby, offering nods or head shakes when directly addressed, but maintaining his silence. Buck had become an eager participant, often racing to the riverbank when Emma appeared, tail wagging enthusiastically. "Mom says the town is having a 4th of July picnic at the lake." Emma informed him one particularly hot afternoon. "There's going to be fireworks and a band. Will you be there, Mr. Thornton?" Robert shook his head. "Why not? Is it because you don't talk? And people might ask you questions." Robert looked up, surprised by her perception. After a brief hesitation, he nodded once. "That's what I thought," Emma said, satisfaction in her tone. "People can be weird about stuff like that. Like when my dad first left, some kids didn't know what to say to me, so they just stopped talking to me for a while. As if me not having a dad living with me was catching like a cold." Robert found himself moving closer to the riverbank, drawn by the understated hurt in her voice. "Mom says sometimes people just don't know the right words, so they don't say anything at all. I guess that's kind of like what you do, except all the time." Emma studied him with a seriousness beyond her years. "Does it make things easier? Not talking?" Slowly, Robert rocked his hand from side to side, sort of. "I get that. Sometimes I don't want to talk about my dad leaving either. But Mom says keeping feelings inside is like shaking up a soda. Eventually it's going to explode." As July unfolded, Emma's daily visits became the focal point around which Robert's routine revolved. For the first time in 5 years, his life contained an element of unpredictability that he found himself welcoming rather than dreading. The afternoon that changed everything arrived without warning. July had been unusually dry, but the morning dawned with heavy clouds building to the west. By early afternoon, the sky had darkened threateningly, though no rain had yet fallen. Robert, working in the field nearest the river, kept glancing toward Emma's rock, half hoping she would stay home given the approaching storm. But at her usual time, he spotted her bright yellow raincoat making its way down the path. "Hi, Mr. Thornton," she called, settling onto her rock. "Mom says this will be a big storm, but I wanted to finish the chapter one was reading to you yesterday." Robert frowned, gesturing at the darkening sky, and then pointing back toward her house. "I'll be quick," Emma promised. "Just one chapter, then I'll go right back." The first fat raindrops began to fall as Emma finished her reading, punctuated by distant thunder. "I guess I should head back now," she said, looking up as lightning flashed, followed by a rumble of thunder much closer than before. Robert nodded emphatically, already gathering his tools. The storm was moving in faster than anticipated, the wind picking up significantly. As Emma stood on her rock, another flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Startled, she lost her footing on the now slick surface and tumbled sideways into the river, which was already rising with rainfall upstream. Robert dropped his tools without hesitation, racing toward the riverbank as Emma surfaced, gasping and flailing. The current immediately began carrying her downstream, her small yellow raincoat visible against the churning water. "Help!" she cried, struggling against the powerful flow. Without conscious thought, Robert plunged into the river, his long legs carrying him into the deepest part with powerful strides. The cold water shocked his system, but adrenaline propelled him forward, eyes fixed on a flash of yellow, being swept around a bend. Emma was doing her best to swim toward shore, but the current was pushing her toward a section where fallen trees created a dangerous strainer that could trap her underwater. Robert redoubled his efforts, powerful arms cutting through the water as he closed the distance. Just as she was about to be swept into the tangle of branches, Robert lunged forward, his hand catching the hood of her raincoat. With a powerful pull, he drew her against his chest, turning to shield her from the current. He felt her small arms wrap around his neck, clinging with the desperate strength of fear. Finding a momentary foothold on a submerged rock, Robert adjusted his grip on Emma. It was then, with the child trembling against him and the roar of the storm in his ears, that Robert Thornton heard his own voice for the first time in 5 years. "Hold on to me. I've got you." The words emerged rough and raspy from disuse, but clear enough to be heard above the storm. Emma's grip tightened in response, her face pressing into his shoulder. With one arm securely holding Emma, Robert used his free arm and legs to battle the current, angling toward the side of the river. Buck raced along the shore, barking frantically, as if guiding them to safety. After what seemed an eternity, Robert's boots found solid footing on the sloping riverbank. Staggering slightly, he carried Emma well away from the water's edge before setting her down. Rain continued to pour down as Robert knelt to check her for injuries, his hands trembling not just from cold, but from the surge of emotions he had suppressed for so long. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice strange to his own ears. Emma stared at him with wide eyes. "You talked," she whispered. "You really can talk." Robert cleared his throat. "Been a while. Why don't you talk? Is it because you're sad?" Robert studied her for a long moment. Talking. It didn't seem important anymore. But how do people know what you're thinking? Never much cared if they did. Emma's small brow furrowed. "That sounds lonely." The simple observation hit Robert with unexpected force. Yes, it had been lonely. Unutterably, soul-crushingly lonely. But loneliness had seemed preferable to the alternative. The pity, the painful conversations, the constant reminders of what he had lost. "Come on," he said, changing the subject. "Need to get you dry and warm." Robert carried Emma to his ranch house, where he wrapped her in towels and gave her one of Michael's old sweatshirts that had been packed away for years. While she called her mother on Robert's rarely used landline, he prepared hot chocolate on the stove, Margaret's remedy for any crisis, large or small. "Mom says thank you for saving me," Emma reported, hanging up the phone. "She's coming to get me as soon as it's safe to drive. The road is starting to flood in some places." Robert nodded, then picked up the phone himself. "Mrs. Collins?" "Robert Thornton. Emma's safe, no injuries." Storm's bad. Roads might not be passable for a while. She can stay here until it clears. As he hung up, Emma stared at him with undisguised fascination. You really are talking. Like, full sentences and everything. Robert felt a small smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Seems that way. Why now? After all this time? Some things are more important than silence. Emma nodded sagely. Like saving someone from drowning. Like that. Will you keep talking now? Or will you go back to being quiet once I leave? It was a question Robert hadn't yet asked himself. The words were coming easier now, each sentence less of a struggle than the last. Don't know yet, he admitted. Emma sipped her hot chocolate thoughtfully. I think you should keep talking. You have a nice voice. Kind of growly, but nice. The conversation continued as the storm raged outside. Emma's natural curiosity led her to ask about ranch life, about Buck, about the photograph she spotted on the mantelpiece. When Emma asked about the photograph of Michael, Robert hesitated only briefly. My son, Michael, he died 5 years ago. Horse riding accident. That's really sad. I'm sorry. Thank you. Is that when you stopped talking? When he died. Robert nodded. His mother, my wife Margaret, died 6 months before. Cancer. After losing them both, words didn't seem to matter anymore. But they do matter, Emma said with the simple certainty of childhood. How else do people know you care about them? Robert had no answer for that. In truth, he hadn't cared about connecting with anyone after losing his family. Silence had been both a symptom of his grief and a way of maintaining it, keeping the world at bay so he wouldn't have to face living when those he loved most were gone. Headlights swept across the front windows as a vehicle pulled up to the house. Sarah Collins hurried up the porch steps, her face etched with concern. Emma, she called, gathering her daughter in a tight embrace. Thank God you're all right. What were you thinking, going to the river during a storm? I'm sorry, Mom. I just wanted to finish the chapter for Mr. Thornton. Sarah looked up, seeming to truly notice Robert for the first time. Mr. Thornton, I can't thank you enough. If you hadn't been there... She's a good swimmer, Robert said, his voice still rough but clearer now. Fought the current well. Smart kid. Sarah's eyes widened slightly at his response. Still, you risked your own safety. I don't know how I can ever repay you. No repayment needed. Sarah studied him carefully. Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow night? It's the least we can do. Robert's instinct was to refuse, but Emma was looking at him with hopeful eyes. Could bring some fresh beef. Raise it myself. The smile that broke across Emma's face made something long dormant stir in Robert's chest. Summer faded into fall, bringing changes to the rhythm of life in the valley. Emma started 3rd grade at Clearwater Elementary, where her mother took up her position as principal. But the most remarkable change was in Robert Thornton. It began with weekly dinners at the Collins house, where Robert would arrive with farm-fresh offerings, beef, vegetables from his garden, wild berries he'd gathered. Slowly, haltingly, he began to share pieces of his story with Sarah over coffee after Emma had gone to bed. Margaret, my wife, she loved this valley in the fall, he said one evening, watching the wind chase golden leaves across the yard. Said it was like the mountains were on fire. In return, Sarah shared her own story, the slow unraveling of her marriage, her ex-husband's new family, and her determination to give Emma stability despite it all. By October, Robert had become a regular visitor at school events, the harvest dance, and Sunday dinners. People in town who had known only his silence for years watched in amazement as Emma led him around by the hand, introducing him proudly as our neighbor Mr. Robert. Sheriff Dave nearly drove off the road the first time he saw Robert in Jensen's general store, helping Emma select pumpkins while actually carrying on a conversation with the cashier. Never thought I'd see the day, Dave said later to his wife. That little girl accomplished what the whole town couldn't in 5 years. When the first snow fell in late November, Robert arrived at the Collins house with his tools and spent the day weatherproofing windows and doors against the approaching Montana winter. You don't have to do all this, Sarah protested. Been meaning to check these properties for years, he replied. Jim Peterson wasn't much for maintenance. But they both knew it was more than that. On Thanksgiving Day, as they sat around Sarah's dining table. Robert cleared his throat during a lull in the conversation. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice stronger now with regular use. "The East Field would be good for horses." He looked at Emma. "You mentioned wanting to learn to ride." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? Could I? Got an old gentle mare that could use the company. Could teach you, if your mother agrees." Later, as Sarah walked him to his truck, snowflakes catching in her dark hair, she said, "When we moved here, I thought this valley might be too quiet, too empty. I never expected to find, whatever this is." Robert looked at the warm light spilling from the windows of what had once been the lonely Peterson place. Margaret used to say that empty spaces are just waiting to be filled with something new. He hesitated and added, "I'm grateful you and Emma filled this one." As winter settled over Blackfoot River Valley, the lights in Robert Thornton's ranch house burned later into the evening. The pickup truck that had once made solitary monthly trips to town now traveled regularly between two properties. And the man who hadn't spoken in years found himself with plenty to say about the past he'd honor with his silence, and the future that now stretched before him, unexpectedly full of new voices and possibilities.